San Francisco, it's Rex Broadcasting Wrestling Observer with Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez.
Are you ready? Let's get it on.
How's it going, everybody? This is Dave Meltzer. We're going to be here for the next 2 hours talking pro wrestling. And this is going to be one of those shows that 2 hours will not be enough time because in about half an hour or so, we'll be joined by Mick Foley, best-selling author, Hall of Fame wrestler, hardcore legend, and all those things. And we also have plenty of topics to talk about in today's wrestling scene. We got Brian Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly here as well. Brian, how are you doing? I cannot hear Brian.
I'm now doing good.
Oh, now I can hear Brian. Brian, gosh, so many different things to talk about. We're in search of a good pay-per-view, and I think that over the next 2 weeks we're going to find one, aren't we?
May not be a pro wrestling pay-per-view, but we may find one.
Yeah, okay, because let's see, the next 2 weeks of TNA are going to be going head-to-head with the NBA Finals, which is for them, but they got two shots to have a good pay-per-view. WWE's got Bad Blood. Pride's going to be on the 13th, although the show actually takes place this coming Sunday. And, of course, UFC is this coming Friday night. And out of 1, 2, 3, 4. And there's a WWA. And I think there's an XWF in there, too, but I don't even know the date of it. So out of, like, about 6 or 7 shows, we're going to get a good one.
Yeah.
I'm almost sure Pride will be one of the good ones. Yeah. That's a pretty hard show. I don't know. That one looks pretty great on paper. UFC looks interesting on paper. I was watching WWE last night, and I saw all the commercials, and it's very interesting, the commercials. There's, like, no more nobody cares about false advertising anymore because the UFC commercials list Ken Shamrock and Ian Freeman, even though Ken Shamrock got the knee injury and he's out. All of the WWE Barker Channel commercials list Bill Goldberg and Triple H, and they're not even going to change them. And it's like, I don't know, there's something about, like, the whole blasé-ness towards it. It's just like, I guess they feel that, well, you know, we did plan at one point to have, you know, I mean, with the Shamrock thing, that was an injury, and that's unavoidable. And with WWE, that was the plan at one point, and then they changed the plans. But we instead have this pay-per-view on Sunday that, if you thought the last one was brutal, well, you haven't seen anything, have you?
Oh, yes. That's such a great...
I every time I see that commercial for the Triple H Kevin Nash match, I just think, you know... Someone who did that commercial has a great sense of humor.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
In fact, speaking of Mick Foley, I just watched Foley versus Shawn Michaels in that one match.
Oh, the one from Philadelphia from Mind Games?
Yeah. And Vader runs in at the end, and then Sid makes a save, and they throw these punches back and forth. Mm-hmm. And Sid throws just the worst punches you've ever seen in your life, and Mr. Perfect just goes, wow. The same way everybody else said when they were watching on TV, and I thought, that's just like the Nash Hunter promo. Great unintentional humor.
We're going to be talking more about Raw, SmackDown. We're going to have our picks for UFC and Pride. I also want to wish the best to Fred Blassie. Fred Blassie's he's in pretty rough shape right now. Zane Bresloff as well, unfortunately. And we'll talk about the Portland show last night. Zach Gowen. And a whole lot more right after this. You're listening to the Wrestling Observer Live on the Sports Byline Radio Network. Okay, welcome back to Wrestling Observer Live. I'm Dave Meltzer, editor of the Wrestling Observer Newsletter with Brian Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly. We're going to have Mick Foley up in, I don't know, half hour or so, maybe a little bit less. And we've got a ton of other things to talk about. Brian, did you watch SmackDown on Thursday? Or have you already watched SmackDown?
Yeah, I watched it.
I loved that show. Not all of it. I didn't love the last match, but I thought, you know, the Hulk Hogan or Mr. Vince McMahon thing is one of those corny things that 9 times out of 10 when something like that is done in wrestling, it's absolutely hideous. But I thought that was like one of the greatest things that they have ever done in that realm ever.
Oh, yeah. It was one of those things where it just should not have been as fun as it was.
Vince McMahon and Hogan was good too, but Vince McMahon was so great.
Oh, yeah.
And Zach Gowen is...
So smart.
Well, we know Zach Gowen is so smart, but he is just like... I mean, for a 19-year-old kid put in that position, I mean, he's just tremendous. And at least he was on Thursday night on SmackDown.
And imagine having a mentor like Hulk Hogan. Think about that kid in about 20 years. He's already got a head start.
Yes, he does. There will be...
By the best.
Someday 60 Minutes is going to do a story on Zach Gowen. And somebody will. There's not a question. It's just a question of if it's going to be this month, next month, or the month after. But someone is doing a story on Zach Allen. It is going to be the most unbelievable story when it is done. Speaking of which, Tuesday of this week, HBO was over my house, and I was interviewing Katan, and that thing is going to be running on June the 24th. And that is going to be a very interesting story because, I've been interviewed by so much media in the last 20 years, and they were the most well-prepared for a story of anyone that I've ever spoken with. The only ones that I can recall that were at this level was ESPN Outside the Lines 4 years ago when they did that piece, and that was an incredible piece that they did. I don't know if this one will be as good, but I'll bet it'll be on the same level. Maybe, and it may even be better because Armin Katayan, who was putting the piece together, or one of the people putting the piece together. I mean, that's as heavy a hitter as you get. Mm. So anyway, that's something to look forward to, I suppose. Kurt Angle and The Rock return this week, which probably means that this will be a more entertaining week of wrestling than maybe not last week wasn't that bad, but then almost every week we've had in the last couple of months. The Kurt Angle, the production people at WWE, they're great. The writing people are horrible, but the production. Okay, right.
Yes. Kevin Dunn.
No, he's not a book.
Stick to production because he is like the greatest producer I've ever seen in my whole life.
Well, he gets too much credit because some of those pieces are done by other people there. I got to find out who did that Kurt Angle video though. That's got to be priority one because that thing was so good.
Oh yes. But Kevin Dunn's booking ideas and view of wrestling, I could do without.
To say the least. Okay, prediction time. UFC and Pride. Well, I guess we'll start with Pride. Fedor and Kazuki Fujita. Fedor. I agree.
I got to at least get one right.
Heath Herring and Mirko Cro Cop.
Cro Cop.
This one's hard. This one's real hard. Herring. Herring's going to ground and pound him. That's my prediction. Let's see. What are the other big ones on that show? There's Anderson Silva against Daiju Takase. You'll get that one right. Won't, probably.
Well, I'm just going to say Silva because I know nothing about the other dude.
So I'm going to go with Silva, too. Hamanaka against Nino Shembri.
Shembri is going to lose.
Yes, he is. I agree with you there. Let's see. Who else? The
fact that we agree either means I'm turning my predictions around, my win-loss record, or you're turning yours around.
That's right. Well, what's going to happen is the problem with this stuff now is that nobody is really all that. I mean, the smartest people I know were all under 500 at the last UFC.
Yeah.
And Pride, because Pride doesn't matchmake as evenly, they're easier to predict. But that anyone can win nowadays. I mean, there's, what can you say? Like Nino Shembri. Yeah, but that was, you're right. That's an example of anyone who could win, but that's also an example of a fight that if Nino Shembri and Sakuraba had fought 10 times, Sakuraba would win 9, no problem.
Yeah.
And it was just, that was the one he lost. Don Fry, Mark Coleman.
Oh, boy. See, I don't know, because Mark Coleman, he had the neck injury.
Yes.
He has not fought since.
Yes.
And who knows what he can do? Who can really say?
Mark Coleman.
Well, Don Fry.
Really? Okay.
Sure.
All right. Go to UFC. Randy Couture, Chuck Liddell.
Liddell.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Liddell, too. Tank Abbott and Chemo.
Oh, boy.
That's a hard one.
I just predicted that will be fun. But if I had...
it'll be a slobber knocker.
Yes. If I had to pick, I would pick Tank just because he has been fighting more.
Yeah, but he hasn't been fighting more. He's fought once in the last year or so, and Chemo's fought once. They both looked horrible in their fight. God, I don't know. That's a real hard one to pick. I guess. See, Chemo has no stand-up, and Chemo's not all that good on the ground. Tank can throw a hard punch, but Chemo will be in better condition than Tank, I'm almost sure, because both of them probably won't be in great shape. I guess I'll go with Tank Abbott. Trey Teligman, Pedro Hizzo.
Trey.
Okay, Pedro Hizzo. Let's see. What fights are we missing now? I know Ian Freeman and Vernon White. I'll go with Ian Freeman.
I have no clue.
Okay. I think that we can go on to some other things. Portland, your favorite Jackie Gaeta started as Rico's manager, and I know. What do you think of that one?
I guess I'll have to see it on TV.
Yeah, it could be. No. It could either be really good or it could be really bad.
Rico's entertaining enough, and if they give her the role that she should have,
it will work. But they're gonna. Yeah. But the role she should have in almost all the cases, okay, of the guys that were in OVW, the role they should have is the role they have in OVW, and this writing team has never brought anyone in without changing them for the worse. Well, I shouldn't say for the worse because Brock Lesnar obviously was for the better, but without changing them, and usually for the worst.
Yeah.
The other thing, the other one is Orlando Jordan. I was watching Velocity last night, and he is in. And, you know, I know we both watch OVW every week, and we watch the guys that are good and the guys who are bad, and Orlando Jordan is like the bottom of the list. It's amazing that I'll watch this show, and I'll know who you should bring in and who you shouldn't, and they always bring in the people who you shouldn't, and they're the ones that they're concerned about are the people they shouldn't be concerned about. And
Orlando Jordan is in, as in he's in.
He's in. I mean, he'll still be working the middle of the week in OVW, but he's in. He's on television. He's a SmackDown superstar as of last Tuesday.
Really?
Yeah. As are the Holly brothers. No, not the Holly brothers. The Basham brothers. Yeah, I'm sorry, the Basham brothers. Yeah, do you know the whole story about that one?
That no one knew they were feuding, I'm sure.
Oh, no. Okay, they were on the road, and they were supposed to work a dark match on Tuesday, and one of the segments on SmackDown, and I don't know which segment it was, but I'm assuming it's the Rey Mysterio, that Rey Mysterio and Matt Hardy were supposed to wrestle for the title, and Rey couldn't wrestle. So they needed something to fill 5 minutes of time, and those guys were there, and they just go, okay.
We're now brothers.
You're now brothers, even though they're feuding in OVW. You know, Jim Cornette has been booked into corners, and not by himself. You know, a lot of bookers book themselves into corners, like Vince Russo every week. Jim Cornette has been booked into corners by WWE, but he has never been booked into a bigger corner than he, who has been built up this feud for, what's it been, about 4 months between Doug Basham and Damaja. And then on a Tuesday night, for a show that airs on a Thursday night, which means he doesn't even get a TV show in between to figure out what he's going to do, they're now brothers. And they're feuding in OVW. And I watched the OVW TV from Sunday, or or actually it was last night's TV because I got the tape early. And, boy, they're still feuding all right.
Oh, yes. I predict that somehow he will salvage this.
Yeah? Do ya?
I don't know how.
This one's going to be a test.
This will be his hardest one ever.
Yes.
But remember that, God, it was like 3 months ago.
Well, the damage in the Royal Rumble.
Oh, yes.
That was a hard one. He came through that one with flying colors. That was one of the most awesome things.
Yes.
I don't know that... This one's tougher, though. How do you have these guys that are on WWE TV as brothers, that everyone in your part of the country knows they're not brothers because they've seen them from the start, and they know who they are, and they know they're not brothers, which is a problem. Plus, everything you've done is like... Every angle that they've done for main events is like out the window because of... because WWE needed to fill 5 minutes of time and just saw these two guys sort of looked alike, sit in the corner that were supposed to work a dark match and go, hey, why don't you guys wrestle tonight?
Yeah.
Unbelievable, huh?
No, actually it's not.
I know, because that's the wrestling business in the year 2003. We're going to be back with more. We're going to start taking your phone calls. You can join us at 1-800-878-PLAY, although all lines are busy. We'll have Mick Foley up in just a couple of minutes as well. You're listening to the Wrestling Observer Live on the Sports Byline Radio Network. Okay, welcome back to Wrestling Observer Live. I'm Dave Meltzer, editor of the Wrestling Observer Newsletter, with Brian Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly. If you're looking for information on either of the two publications, write this one down. After the show, go to www.wrestlingobserver.com. Of course, every day there's a bunch of new news updates. There's columns during the week from various writers, some of whom call into the show. And there's always information on how to subscribe to both the Wrestling Observer newsletter, which I do every week, and Figure 4 Weekly, which Brian does every week. And also, want to make a point about this week's Observer, because this week's Observer is one of the best ones of the year. It's another one of the history issues. We're talking about the period 1988 and 1989 in specific, the greatest year of Ric Flair's career, Hulk Hogan. It was actually a pretty great period to be a wrestling fan those 2 years, and talked to a lot of people who were around then and remembered a lot of things. Actually, some of the greatest matches of all time were during that period, and some of the biggest matches of all time as well. And a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, much of which has never been written anywhere. Believe me, it's never been written anywhere, because I would have written it if it had, and a lot of it I'd never written before about the beginnings of World Championship Wrestling, the company, and the first couple of years of the company, as well as the angles, the thought process, and so much of the stuff that happened involving the rise to fame, and thoughts regarding the rise to fame of people like the Ultimate Warrior, Sting, and Lex Luger. So it's going to be a heck of an issue, plus all of the wrestling news from this week, and which will include big stuff on the Portland show last night, which was the first WWE show in that city in 10 years, and was their biggest house show and domestically, non-TV taping house show anyway. And, God, it's probably been a couple of years since they've had a show that big.
Yeah, it has to be.
Yeah, over just under 15,000 paid for that show, I believe, was the actual number. Let's see. We are going to start taking phone calls. We're going to go to Jeff in New York City. And by the way, for if you want to join in at 1-800-878-PLAY, all you got to do is, when we're done with the call, you can jump on the line then, because that's when, there'll be a line open. Jeff, what's happening?
Hey, what's going on, guys? I got two quick questions. Hopefully they're quick. First one is about Hiro Matsuda. I was reading in two different books. I think it was Freddie Blassie said one thing, and Lou said one thing concerning that infamous night at the club. One said that when he got stabbed, he stayed there. The other one said that he actually went to the hospital and then came back. So my question is, which is the real story?
I remember when I have heard the story, and I've heard it a million times in Japan, it was always...
Ricky, sorry.
When Ricky Dozan died in '63, he said he went to the hospital and then came back drinking that night to show that he wasn't hurt. But that he did he didn't just stay in the club. That's how I heard the story.
Oh, okay.
What exactly did the hospital say to this man?
Stay here. And he didn't. But he was used to not selling.
I see.
Yes, because he believed he was Ricky Dozan, which is a very, very bad thing to do when you've been stabbed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my other question is about the book review on Freddie Blassie's book on your website.
Todd Martin's review? Yeah.
Pardon me? Yeah, no, it was just a little snippet he put in there. I thought it was very interesting. I wanted to hear both of you guys' opinions on it. He said that Freddie Blassie was basically saying, that all the old guys, they really have this old attitude about today's wrestling, and that, specifically Kurt Angle, if he was in that era where Lou Thesz was champion, Kurt Angle might have been NWA champion. So I'm actually curious, what do you make of that?
I think that Fred Blassie, and he's always been like this. Most of the old time wrestlers, when you talk to them, they'll always say that the guys were tougher in their day. It's just a different business. I mean, it's like baseball people will argue to their death. Boxing people will argue to their death that the guys from the past could beat the guys currently. Football people, even though in football, which is a speed and power sport, and the guys are faster, bigger and stronger, and by far, people will just say, but the old guys were tougher. They're mentally tougher. It's like. And there's, the only sports that we can say that, without any question, that the guys, who from which era were the best is sports like track and swimming and weightlifting and sports like that, because there's the marks are non-subjective marks. It's how fast you can run is how fast you can run. And in all of these sports, there's not, with no exceptions, the guys of today, generally speaking, are faster than the guys, certainly in the 50s. In some sports, I know the shot put, because so many fewer people go into shot put, the marks in the last 20 years really haven't improved that much. But they're still better than they were in the 50s. Okay. But wrestling, just the whole way, the fan bases, the fans are different, the wrestlers are different. I mean, as far as Kurt Angle, the Kurt Angle of today, or the Kurt Angle of his prime, wrestling in a real wrestling match against the guys of that era, I think he would he would beat all of them in a freestyle wrestling match.
And if the question is whether they would have put the belt on Kurt Angle back then, yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay. If Kurt Angle, a man with this speaking ability, with this wrestling talent, and an Olympic gold medal, came out in 1948, he absolutely would be world heavyweight champion for 10 years and not Lou Thesz. Yes.
Only if he was a hooker, though, right? You have to be.
No. Why would that have anything to do with it? Because that didn't. I mean.
A lot of them during that era, they they wanted the champion to be protected, so he had to know how to.
Kurt, they would have been a lot more confident with Kurt than with anybody else. I mean, if you look at
if they taught Kurt Angle 5 holds, he'd be a hooker.
There's the hooking thing. There's some myths to the hooking thing too, but I mean, Luthez knew his submissions, and a lot of guys didn't, and that was a great advantage for Luthez. But Kurt Angle was a far superior freestyle wrestler than Luthez ever was. But if you look at the other champions, say a Dick Hutton, here's a perfect example. Luthez has told me on more than one occasion that he could never have beaten Dick Hutton. Dick Hutton was too good, and Kurt Angle was better than Dick Hutton. So there's your answer right there.
Damn.
Yeah.
Actually, both met.
Yeah, Dick Hutton was 8th in the Olympics. In 8th in the Olympics in 48, I believe, and Kurt was a gold medalist in 96, and in 48 years wrestling evolved 48 years worth. You know what I mean? So it's like it's just if this Kurt Angle was in a time machine and he showed up, in the world of 1947 pro wrestling, by 1950 he would be the man. No, there's not a doubt in my mind. Okay?
All right, thanks a lot, guys.
Okay, very welcome. Let's go to Jonathan, Savannah, Jordan. Jonathan, what's going on?
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Not too much.
I had a couple questions for you. My first one was, I thought I read something on the internet about originally the plan for Eddie and Chavo was to win the belts at the last pay-per-view at Judgment Day and then have like a long reign.
You know something?
Before he got hurt.
That's very suspicious reading something like that on the internet, isn't it? But anyway. But no, actually, I wrote that about 2 weeks ago, and I guess it just must have made it on. But yeah, it's a true story, though. Yeah.
Okay. And my question now is, are they planning on keeping that frame of mind with Eddie and Tajiri?
I don't know, but I would seriously doubt it. I think
here's the other thing you have to think about. That was their long-term plan. And had Chavo not gotten hurt and had they won the title,
they still would have changed it.
No guarantee that they would have held them for any length of time.
No, they still could have changed it. That's right.
Okay. And my other question, Dave, I know I heard you say you were watching, I guess, Velocity and Confidential, or maybe just Confidential last night.
I watched Confidential last night. What a waste of time that was.
There was nothing to it, but
yeah.
Did you happen to catch Velocity?
Caught a lot of it, yeah.
Okay. My question has to do with Jamie Noble. I don't know if you saw his,
With Jamie Noble and Orlando Jordan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But my question for him, about Noble, is he pretty much doomed? Is there any...
Yeah, I would say he's pretty much doomed, yeah.
He's doomed. I think that he's good enough that they'll at least keep him around to always put guys over and make them look.
Oh, no, I don't think he's doomed. I don't think he's doomed as a guy going to lose his job, but I think he's doomed as far as a guy being a superstar in professional wrestling. Under this administration, he's doomed because I think that they just look at his size and, hey, everyone knows he's good. I don't think there's anyone in that company who will go, hey, this guy's not good. That they're just going to go, he's too small, and, we've got one small guy we're pushing, and it's going to be Rey Mysterio.
Yeah, look how fast they gave up on Spanky.
Yeah. Oh, God, and the guy was so talented, too, and charismatic.
Look at that thing with John Cena.
Yeah, they just
that wrap-off thing.
Oh, it was so great, and then they squashed him the next week.
Yep, let's kill him.
Yeah.
And I have 2 more questions for you. One of them, with them doing Matt Hardy versus Ray at the next pay-per-view.
It's not the next pay-per-view. It's
next week.
It's Tuesday night. Yeah.
Yeah. Are they planning on I know originally you had said something before about originally there was supposed to be, I guess when Heyman was booking, they were going to try to do a long feud before they pulled Matt Hardy out.
Oh, that was that when they gave Albert the spot instead of yeah.
Are they planning on doing something like that, or is this just
not the same? Not the same. I seriously doubt they're going to do They're not going to do an injury angle with Rey Mysterio unless he's really injured, because Rey Mysterio gets injured enough for real, that they're not going to make up a worked injury on him. But as far as are they going to do a long feud?
Right. No. Yeah.
At that level of the card, they don't care. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I could say, or they could have this idea today that they will, and next week they won't, because the bottom of the card is just stuff they fill in, really.
Okay. And my last comment, I had 2 quick comments. One, I wanted to get you if you could ask Mick when he gets on about his thoughts on Kurt Angle. And my other comment...
I think he thinks Kurt Angle's great, but we can... I'm sure... I think that subject's going to come up.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my other question was, if you saw Raw, I just wanted to say that I loved the highlight reel in the Mace and Goldberg's face.
I liked the highlight reel, too. I thought that was a fun segment. And a good segment. I wish Goldberg had done an interview at the end, or at least, broken some furniture, and they hadn't cut away the way they did. But as far as Jericho's performance in that thing was really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it, Dave. Thanks.
Okay. All right, we'll be taking some more phone calls right after this. You're listening to the Wrestling Observer live on the Sports Byline Radio Network. Okay, welcome back to Wrestling Observer Live. I'm Dave Meltzer, editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, with Brian Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly. We should have Mick Foley up during this segment, just next couple of minutes. We are going to go back to the phone calls first. We're going to go to Justin in Oil City, Pennsylvania. Justin, what's happening?
Hey, Dave, how's it going?
It's going pretty good.
Okay, now that we're, I think, 6 months into the voting period, if we count December, then who would you pick as wrestler of the year right now?
Oh, my God. You know, every, candidate that I thought is, been injured or something. Kenny Kobashi. How about you, Brian?
God, I haven't even really thought about it.
I haven't thought about it a lot. But
the one match I saw from Kobashi, I would give it to him.
But that's the guy I would give it to, yeah.
Okay, and Kobashi Masal is probably going to win match of the year, no matter what happens.
I think that if...
I would be so shocked.
If there is another match that good this year, I will be seed, because I cannot imagine... I can't imagine that that you could be a match with that kind of atmosphere, just because of the nature of all the companies and everything. None of the companies really have that thing going for them where they could produce it.
Okay.
That's where you watch it and you're like, how seriously could anything beat this match?
Yeah. That's the best match in years.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I have an issue of The Observer from March 1990, and I wanted to read a letter about Mick Foley in it.
Okay.
It says... a few years from now, when Cactus Jack Manson is living in some trailer park in the Southwest...
He's not. Isn't that amazing? Wait. What?
Please comp him a lifetime subscription, since he'll be hooked on painkillers for life. So I was wondering if when Mick came on, you could ask him how his trailer park was working out.
Yeah, a lot of people used to say that in those days. And he proved them wrong, but he is banged up from it.
Yeah.
But believe me, we'll talk a lot about that. He should be up momentarily, too.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, you're very welcome. We're going to go to Alan in Deerfield Beach. What's going on? Going good.
Great. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. First, do you think that Nash is going to go over in Hell in a Cell? Hope not.
No, I don't think so. Anything's possible, but I don't think so.
Right. They're building Goldberg versus Nash, or what are they building?
Goldberg Triple H is supposed to be the main event at SummerSlam, and that would be a combined pay-per-view as opposed to one of these brand specifics like we're having in June and July.
Right. Do you expect Ric Flair to do a clean job for Shawn Michaels? Or?
Yes, I do expect that. Especially since it's in Houston, Texas, which is Shawn Michaels' state. But, even if it was anywhere, even if it was in Charlotte, I would expect Ric Flair would lose, to be honest.
Really?
Which would be stupid, but I would still expect it.
Do they respect each other a lot?
I'll tell you what, the thing on Monday? Yeah. The thing on Monday was pretty close to real, wouldn't you say, Brian?
Really?
I can't hear his question. Are you talking about Shawn and...
The thing with Shawn Michaels and Ric Flair on Monday on the Raw, don't you think that was pretty close to real?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's pretty close. So.
And what about Hunter? He's close to Flair behind the scenes?
Oh, yeah. Flair and him like each other.
I was ready to cry during that thing.
I was starting to cry before. I was amazed Rick lasted that long before he started crying.
Right.
No, Hunter and Rick were very close, yes.
Okay. Yeah. You mentioned, I want to ask you another question. You mentioned something about on the web, on Wrestling Classics, I think you sometimes post, right?
Yes, I do.
You mentioned Bruno Sammartino and Hulk Hogan have personal heat. What does it stem from? If you can give a little synopsis.
What does it stem from?
Is it from just business or what?
I think there's a couple of things. I think that, Bruno Sammartino took great pride in what he was, and he thought that he was a great representative for wrestling. And I think he thought that Hulk Hogan, by his standards, was kind of a phony. Right. Bruno was very anti-steroids, although Bruno made money working with guys on steroids, but Bruno himself never took steroids, and Hulk Hogan was a creature of steroids who, for a while there was lying about steroid use.
Right.
I think that when Hogan got so big in the 80s, I think that Bruno, there was probably a resentment because in his own way, and it's a different period and it's a different kind of emotion, but in his own way, Bruno was bigger than Hogan.
Right.
And Bruno never got that kind of recognition, and then they would talk about, Hogan's drawing power in some of these buildings, and Bruno's numbers at various times in his career were better than Hogan's numbers, but Bruno, again, felt like everyone's saying Hogan's got this, and this, and he didn't get the credit because the media just didn't touch wrestling. They thought it was beneath them. And I think that Bruno thought that his style, his brand of wrestling was harder, more realistic, a better brand. Right. And people would go to him and goes, wow, Bruno, don't you think it's really great now that wrestling's popular? And, not like in your day when, like wrestling wasn't in, and he'd be sitting there going like, I drew more than these guys did. I was more over than these guys did, and they're asking me, isn't it great that like wrestling's bigger now? And I think he, there's going to be resentment. It's a natural thing.
Jealousy, or that's it?
I think that. Well, no, they don't like each other. That's for sure. But I think that, and I think it goes both ways. I think that, Hogan didn't like being criticized, but Bruno never liked Hulk Hogan, and thought of him as a phony, and.
I mean, as far as his personality, or just his work, or what?
The whole package. I mean, you have to talk to Bruno, about that. But I think the whole package. I think what he represented. I just, the era of wrestling, how wrestling changed, and in Bruno's mind, not for the better. And you can debate that all you want. I mean, there's two sides to that debate. But in Bruno's mind, in the Bruno Sammartino mind, I think that's kind of where that's going to come from. I mean, I can understand where he comes from on that issue.
Right. I mean, it's a personal dislike between them because he, Hogan kind of like didn't even acknowledge him in his book. He kind of like made like little snide comment, like
he made some snide comments, and that was the one about Shea Stadium was totally uncalled for because I mean anyone who was around in 1980 knows that Shea Stadium house was drawn by Bruno Sammartino and Larry Zbyszko, and Hogan and Andre may not have even been the second biggest drawing match on the show because Bob Backlund and Pedro Morales and the Samoans was actually hyped just as big, on an equal level as Hogan and Andre. But Hogan, claimed that, him and Andre were the ones that actually drew the house. And, Zbyszko's real mad about that one, too. And they have a right to be mad. That was like the high point of both of their careers, and Hogan's trying to take credit for it.
Right.
Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, you're very welcome. We have Mick Foley on the line today. Mick, how are you tonight?
I'm doing good, thanks.
Mick, your book, Tatum Brown, is coming out in a couple of weeks, and it's your first nonfiction book.
Right.
And you're frequently a novel. I've heard a lot about it. I've read some things about it, and I know that there's a lot of wrestling because I think that a lot of the stories that you're telling or the personalities that you're creating are based on things that you've learned in your life and been around in your life, and much of your life has been around pro wrestling.
Yeah. I mean, I think people say you write what you know. And, I think that after spending 16 years in wrestling, it definitely gave me great access to a much better cast of characters than, a lawyer or, a doctor would come across. And it's strange because, I think people see it as being very odd for a wrestler to start writing. But I find a lot of similarities. And I think that, like I said, you come across so many interesting people, and you're on the road, and you have access to people of all different states and economic situations in different countries. That you actually, I think, get a very good education on the road if you want to get one. If you want to just train and eat at the same restaurants, and it's possible that you only come out of your 16 years with having seen airports and buildings. But I really think I came across a great cast of characters in the stories in the years I was there. So I do think I kind of leaned heavily on my wrestling experience to create the characters in this book.
Now, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about what the book, what the basic plot of the book and what it's about?
Sure. It's my editor first described it as a coming-of-age tale laced with violence, and I think that some people in the media are really on the violence part and not really, bothering to look at the fact that it is a coming-of-age story. But it's about a kid who was given up for adoption and was never legally adopted as a small child, and it's about the father who comes back into his life at the age of 17 years, and they're very strange and, in some ways oddly touching relationship.
What gave you the idea for this?
You know what? I was watching the movie called Affliction back when I was living in Florida about 3 years ago, and James Coburn played the dad, and Nick Nolte played the son. And James Coburn won an Oscar for the role, and he was just such a miserable, horrible father. It was hard to really like the movie, and it was a very depressing movie. And I remember being so impressed by his performance, and I thought, what if you could come up with a story about a father? And I don't want to give away too much here, but a father who has some very bad parts to his personality, but is a whole lot more charming than James Coburn. And for about a year, I just sat there, and at nights I'd lie awake just thinking of ideas. And it really, you know what, it was one of those things as far as writing a novel that seemed out of my grasp. You know, I figured I'd written autobiographies, but I think people sometimes look at things they haven't done and think they're impossible to do. It really wasn't until I read Stephen King's book on writing, which was called On Writing, that, you know, I saw that he stressed, you know, characters and storytelling above plot and, you know, writing mechanics. And I really thought, you know, characters and storytelling is you know, is pretty much what we did, you know, what I did my whole career. So it was, you know, a few months after that, or actually several months after that, I kind of psyched myself up into thinking that I could actually do it.
So did you, like, do research, like talking to people who had whacked out dads, or?
No, you know, that part of it, you know what, I said in a Q&A with my publisher that, you know, that the dad was actually an amalgamation of all the different people I'd met on the road, a lot of different wrestlers. Not that I was thinking one guy in particular, but he's a guy that has he is an ex-wrestler. That's something probably the listeners would find interesting. And I'm worried that you know, critics are going to jump on it and say it's a story about a wrestler, because it really isn't. But I thought that a lot of the guys I'd seen who'd kind of been chewed up and spitting out by the road and by the business itself, and were so bitter about it, I thought it would be great to have a character who had that kind of bitterness, you know, that kind of, you know, leads him to some of the decisions he makes later in his life. You know, so as far as research, you know, I actually hit up some of my old wrestling friends. I remember asking Harley Race in Kansas City a couple of years ago if he could think of a very bitter, lighter weight wrestler, a guy who really thought he should have made it a lot bigger than he did, and I made the guy something of a like a pioneer in wrestling civil rights. He worked the territories in the late 50s and the 60s.
Oh, kind of like a Sputnik Monroe type of character?
Yeah, you know what? I actually listed Sputnik in my acknowledgments.
Yeah.
Because while I was writing it, I had no idea that he had done the type of things he did. You know, that he had been a tag team with a African American guy in Memphis. I had no idea, and this was my character was kind of doing the things that Sputnik did. So it was after I read The Observer and read about those things. I thought, you know, I'd give him an acknowledgement so that you know, he's a guy who loved the business, and I think all the, you know, publicity, and I think it would make him feel good to be acknowledged for the things he did.
You know, Mick, we got to go head to a commercial break, but we're going to come back with more. We got a lot to talk about current wrestling, your wrestling career. There's an endless supply of subjects, believe me.
Cover it all.
And this is going to go way too quick for us. But anyway, we got to head to a break. We'll be back with more with Mick Foley right after this. You're listening to the Wrestling Observer Live on the Sports Byline Radio Network. Okay, welcome back to Wrestling Observer Live. I'm Dave Meltzer, editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, with Brian Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly, and of course our special guest this week, Mick Foley, Hall of Fame wrestler, one of the great brawling legends of all time. A couple of best-selling books under his belt already, and he's got a new book coming out in just a couple of Tatum Brown. His first his first fiction book, first novel, and with some wrestling overtones. And you know, one of the things I want to ask you is you were someone who grew up as a huge fan, wanted to be a wrestler, you know, started out with a lot of disadvantages going against you, and a lot of people who, by traditional ways that they judge talent, would have said, you know, God, you know, work hard, good worker, but you're never going to make it, and then made it bigger than, you know, all but a few wrestlers, you know, in modern wrestling.
Right.
And at the same, and then it was over. You know, you retired it, and largely on your own, which very few people get to do in wrestling, and transitioned. I mean, is there a lot of people that have left wrestling, you know, and almost all of them have drifted back, you know, because, you know, just because it's what they know, and now you're doing something totally different. But I mean, how, you know, like, do you have the pains as far as like leaving and, you know, wanting to come back and things like that?
Well, you know what? I really think the writing made it a lot easier. One of the things I really loved about wrestling was the creative part of it. And I wrote in the first book about how I'd be in the gym and my fingers would be twitching and my lip would be quivering and I'd be working on promos that it was one of those things that I was constantly thinking about. Even when I wasn't doing it, I was always thinking about the business. And I think if I just had bailed out and become a dad, that I really would have missed that creative part of it. But I'm lucky because I really feel the same way about writing. It fulfills that same I guess creative need. And and it's cool because I'll be writing the Tatum I wrote over my garage on a folding table using a chair that a fan had gotten me from the Worcester Centrum. Remember this guy showing up with the two orange, hideous-looking chairs and thinking, what the hell am I going to do with these things? And it turned out, I wrote the book on it. But while I was sitting there,
Mick, we've got to head to our hourly news break.
Okay.
So we're going to come back with more and a lot about the current wrestling scene as well. We're back right after this.
Welcome back to Hour 2 of the Wrestling Observer with Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez. Are you ready? Are you ready? Let's get it on!
Okay, welcome back to Wrestling Observer Live. I'm Dave Meltzer, editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, with Brian Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly. We're here for 2 hours every Sunday night on the Sports Byline Radio Network. Guest tonight, Mick Foley, whose book Tatum Brown will be coming out. What day actually is it coming out, Mick? Hello? Is Mick up? Mick,
I'm here.
Yeah, Mick, what day is the book coming out?
Actually, that was me saying that.
Oh.
I don't know where Mick is.
He should be up. We can't... Okay, well... Now that's quite nice. We'll have Mick up in just a second. Is Mick up yet? He is not up right now. Hello. Okay, Brian.
Yeah.
Until we get Mick up, we should probably talk a little bit about the Raw show on Monday night. Brian, what do you think as far as you pretty much knew what was going to go down with Ric Flair?
Oh yeah.
As far as knowing that, what were your feelings when the show was over?
I was excited when it was over because I knew I got to see my Ric Flair-Shawn Michaels match.
Oh, you'll get to see it.
I mean, as far as Ric Flair, that man should not be booed. He wants to now, but they haven't figured that out, so I've long since given up on, Ric Flair being a babyface. So if he's going to be a heel, at least he's feuding with Shawn Michaels and we get to have a match out of it. So what can you do?
Yep. What is happening right now? I've got to head to the Oakland Coliseum right after this show because we got a WWE house show, and I heard Billy Gunn's going to be back.
Is it the SmackDown or Raw?
SmackDown's running here. Raw's in Albuquerque tonight.
Okay.
Let's see what else. Well, we could always talk about. Besides that, on the Bad Blood pay-per-view, we got Shawn Michaels and Ric Flair in their second ever singles match, I believe. Would that be correct? And the Triple H, Kevin Nash, Booker T, Christian, La Resistance against Rob Van Dam and Kane. And we're going to go ahead and do a break right now, and hopefully we will have everything fixed up with Mick. We'll have Mick Foley up right after the break. Okay, he's there now, but we have to go to a break. So anyway, we will be back. We'll be talking about Mick Foley's writing of the book Tatum Brown, and we're going to talk a lot about the current wrestling scene with Mick Foley, and whatever you guys want to talk about. I know the lines are lit up. 1-800-878-PLAY. When someone hangs up, you'll be able to jump on the line, and we'll be back right after this. Wrestling Observer Live on the Sports Byline Radio Network. Okay, welcome back to Wrestling Observer Live. I'm Dave Meltzer, editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter with Brian Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly. We're here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, 5 to 7 p.m. Pacific time on the Sports Byline Radio Network. Mick Foley, legendary pro wrestler and now two-time best-selling author, is our guest, who's got another book coming out in just a couple of weeks. And we were talking right before the break about how you were writing the book and how it helped your transition out of pro wrestling, and you probably made a smoother transition than a lot of wrestlers have.
Yeah, but while I was on the break and I catching up with the news there, I was thinking about it, and the truth is, when I left in April of 2000, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do because I just had a baby and it was important. No, I hadn't had a baby yet, but my other two kids were getting a little older, and I did want to spend more time at home. I got called in just like 2 months later and asked about the commissioner's role. So when I became the commissioner, I really thought I was going to be with the company from that point on. I couldn't see a time when I wouldn't be with them. And even when I left in December of 2000, that was when I left because my wife was about to have a baby. I really thought there was going to be a short break. So it wasn't like I was planning a long, long time away from wrestling, but it definitely, I believe, has helped a great deal. And the other thing is I try to talk to kids quite a bit and visit with kids and talk to groups of special education classes. And so in a way, I'm still getting responses and reactions, which I think is why I got into wrestling in the first place. So all of that has helped a lot. And there are times still when I hear certain songs that I think, very briefly about what it would be like to get back in the ring, but then thankfully that passes.
Yeah.
Now, was that December one the day where you did the thing on Raw with Vince and his jet?
No, that was later. That was when he came back.
The second less successful commissioner's run.
Okay.
I think people have erased from their minds. That was when I got called back, and I was just about to start writing, and I was kind of in like Never Land there, and it was really frustrating. And if I could, place an exact time when I think things started going bad between me and the company, it would really be the exact that I called up Stu Snyder and told them, that I was going to accept Judith Regan's offer on the novel. And it was like, from that point on, everything before that point had been, generally speaking, very positive, and everything after that was very tense. And I was thinking today about it, and I believe, and it's not Stu Snyder's fault because I liked him, and it was good that I always had his ear. But before that, I had always been able to talk to Vince directly, and I think when he got involved in the XFL and had so many things on his plate, I kind of lost that personal touch with Vince. And I think that if I had been in touch with him, we probably would have pulled off that WrestleMania 2001 match, and B, I think we probably could have worked out in a ring where I could have done the book on my own and continued to, have some hand in the company. But it just got to the point where it was really, kind of ugly. And the commissioner's role, I didn't feel like it was that. The second time around, I didn't think it was that compelling. And I was writing the book. I wrote it in October and November of 2001. So a lot of it was written on the road. But when they finally called me in, they finally realized, this isn't going to work. And I think we were at a point where if I had stayed any longer, it really would have resulted in me, hating the company. JR, but I think I'll take it over in the meantime. And so the last thing I did was a very weird interview on the plane where I told Vince that, took someone who loved the company and made him hate it, which at the time was, exactly how I felt. But,
and it was the most amazing thing ever on TV.
What's that?
It was just so weird.
Just the whole thing with the plane and talking about what built the plane and
you telling him that and then leaving
and then him saying thank you.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, the last conversation I had with Vince, and it was a weird thing because I walked out on the plane and Paul Lee was there. And Paul Lee said, "There's Ric Flair," and this was in Charlotte, remember?
Yeah.
And so I walked over to Flair, and I didn't know what to expect there because I'd said some things that probably didn't show him in the best light. And to his credit, he was very much a gentleman about it. And if he was mad, he did a good job of pretending he wasn't.
I think he can do that too.
Well, you know what? I think the fact that I talked about what a great wrestler he was, and I think maybe word got out in the second book that I'd spoken very highly of him as far as what he did for Brian Hildebrandt, and I did say that I would always be proud. Even the first book, I said I was proud that I came in while Flair, that he was kind of the guy that brought me into WCW in the first place. But the last thing I said to Vince was that, and I think, Dave, you and I have talked about this over the past couple of years, that the scripting of the interviews, to me, has hurt the product. Is it's kind of taken away the heart and soul of the real money-drawing promos. And even when things were at their best, even though there was nothing to be disgruntled about, the veterans will always grumble about something. And I think it was Shawn Michaels that I was talking to during one of his, infrequent trips back, and I said, one of these days the business is going to stop becoming hot, and we're going to need guys who can give those promos. But, ironically, the guys who can give those promos will be the guys who are seen as not being able to draw because they'll be doing it during a downtime. So I said to Vince, that was what I told Vince. I said, Vince, I think you need to start going with guys who can give those promos and have guys who can give them help the other guys. And I even pointed to Flair, and I said, you got one of the best of all time. You guys ought to, use his talents to help out the other guys. So
when you talk about that, I got something I've really been thinking a lot about this one. Okay, and that is the guys right now, because of their experience, like Ric Flair and even Roddy Piper and certainly Hogan.
Right.
And maybe a little less Piper just because of his physical condition, but Flair and Hogan are so dynamic on promos that, with the exception of maybe a Kurt Angle, and of course Rock is tremendous, but a lot of the younger guys, they I don't know. They can't come to that level, and then they're sitting there on the same show with these guys, like say Brock Lesnar, right, who's on the same show every week as Hulk Hogan, and when you see them as the promo giving performer, he's obviously not going to be in the guy's league, and it makes kind of people go, well, he comes off as a lesser star than if Hogan wasn't even there at all.
I think there's definitely something to that, some major to that, and I think, honestly, if Piper hadn't wrestled and just been a manager, that he would have been. His interviews come across as being so much better than what most guys are doing that I think he could have, coasted in much the same way he did when he first came to the WWF in like '84. As a heat-getting heel, and I think they dropped the ball on the Hogan Piper thing because it just seemed weird to me to have Roddy, who'd been in a major car accident and and was the mouth of the team inside, while you had O'Hare, the stud, standing outside. It seemed like that it should have been the protege going in there and Piper getting like the cheap heat. But I think interviews wise, like you said, with the exception of guys like Angle and Rock on that show, everyone else comes across as being kind of out of Hogan and Flair's league.
Now, you're a fan and very knowledgeable from all your years in the business and from fandom from childhood, like all of us. When you watch the shows, what's your thoughts as far as where they're missing it? And one of the things, of course, and I agree with you. So many times when I watch Raw, especially, but also SmackDown, I'll watch like a promo or a vignette that's designed purely for comedy and not to go anywhere or to mean anything. And I hit myself in the head. I just go, they just wasted time. And let's say Jericho, who's a very good promo, who and a very good performer, and he'll do one of these comedy things that's meant to be nothing, and I'll just go, he could have done a promo that would have meant something with that same airtime. Instead, they're trying to build up to this joke that isn't really funny at all anyway. And you know what I'm saying?
There's a time and a place for comedy, and there's a time to get serious. And I think that sometimes they mix the two up. And some people probably think, well, there's a great guy to be talking about mixing them up. He's, the last couple of years especially, I relied a lot on comedy, but I think that when it was time to cut a serious promo, the comedy aspect almost worked for me because you could say, all right, here's the guy, all right, now he's mad. And fans were able to suspend their disbelief. And I think in some ways the guys actually do the exact opposite thing. When they should be mad, they're joking around. And take Rock, for example. I think when he came out with Hogan, when he first came back as a heel, you had written that he's so entertaining that this heel thing will work for 2 months tops.
Yeah.
And I thought he was, enormously entertaining, that everything he did was funny. but you never got the sense that he was a guy out of control. It wasn't like, in reading Blassie's book, that fans really believed the guy was out of control. And I think that that's exactly what Goldberg needed, for instance. When he came back, I think he needed like a monster who was, seen as cutting through, all competition, and here, only Goldberg can stop him. And instead, Goldberg comes face to face with this really funny and very entertaining guy who at the time, and by the time Goldberg got to him, fans were chanting his name again.
Yeah.
And so I think, sometimes the timing is off, and this is a strange...
Can you hold on, because we have to actually go to a break right now?
Yeah.
We'll come back with more. We'll hold that thought. This is Wrestling Observer Live on the Sports Byline USA Radio Network. Okay. Dave Meltzer. Oh, God.
Hello.
I'm here. Welcome back to Wrestling Observer Live. I'm Dave Meltzer, editor of the Wrestling Observer Newsletter, with Brian Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly, and of course we got Mick Foley here as well. And when we left off, Mick, we were talking about the current wrestling scene, and a lot of your thoughts about. One thing I wanted to ask you about, because you and I talked about this when I was doing the story on the injuries in wrestling and what can be done to prevent them. And your take, I talked to a lot of current WWE wrestlers at the time, and your take was very different. And I think part of the reason it was because you were out of the business at the time you were talking to me and kind of looking from experience, but sitting there going like, well, whereas everybody else when they're in it, it's kind of like, this is what we do because this is what we do, if you know what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah.
And you and Brian, because Brian had the exact same thought as far as, the idea that in this day and age in 2003, maybe there isn't a need to do so many.
Yeah, they're not drawing so well, right?
They're not. No, the TVs draw well, fairly well, but the house shows are not drawing well at all, with the exception of Portland last night because they hadn't been in for 10 years.
Yeah, I talked to a couple fans today, and they were talking about how they missed the wrestling, and they heard that on non-televised shows there's more wrestling, and and it actually got to me to talking about the fun times I had and how much less pressure you had as a wrestler to go out there and work without time limits and things like that. But I think for every person there who wishes there was more wrestling and is happy they went to a house show, there's probably 10 people saying where's the pyro and where's the interviews and those type of things. I think a lot of the reason that the house shows are down is that people have figured out that when the television cameras aren't on, you don't get all those extras. And I just think, like we talked on the phone when you were talking to me about that, about that situation, that the business is hard enough and the matches are demanding enough that 50 matches a year or even 40 matches a year, I believe, constitutes a full-time job. In some ways, a very difficult match is almost on a par with a boxing match. And, a good boxer will get, 6 months to a year off, and we're back on the road that night driving hundreds of miles sometimes to the next show. And that was also one of the things that was toughest from an emotional standpoint, is you do your pay-per-view, which is like our Super Bowl, but instead of going to Disneyland, you're getting ready to perform in front of a crowd that's 5 or 6 times bigger than you just did the night before, and it really took its toll, I think, mentally and physically.
Now here's something else. Wrestlers, a lot of times, create an environment to the degree of going to matches, and I mean, like when you're on the road, you're in a thing. You've got to be at a city. You've got to go to the gym, basically. But when you're not on the road, you don't have that same structure. A lot of guys that live for wrestling and don't really have other hobbies, let's say,
right,
can kind of, if they had that much time off, because I saw this in WCW, that WCW was a situation where theoretically, it's like everything that maybe wrestling could have been, as far as like the schedule was easier, but at the same time it actually was a complete, not just for that reason, but it was a complete and total disaster, at the last couple of years of that company.
Right. But I also think, the structure of the company took away like the realistic competition for spots.
Yeah.
You had guys literally giving up. Because I look at, like the devastating injuries like Triple H's thigh or Benoit's neck, and to see the shape these guys come back in it shows that not being on the road doesn't mean they're not working hard. And I just think it would be I think you have to count on the dedication of your top guys. I remember Vader brought up what I thought was a great point during a team meeting when Ole Anderson was in charge, and he said that Ole, we had there was one time when we had the day off before a pay-per-view, and everyone got together and I think put on one of our best shows, and wondering if that type of thing can be arranged again so the guys can get a good night's sleep and whatnot. And Ole said, you guys will be screwing off and out in the bar drinking and this type of thing. And I think guys take their job seriously enough, that type of thing wouldn't be happening. And I just, I look at the bumps the guys are taking, that there's only so many bumps you can take before your body's shot. Or maybe you can continue to come back, but, with more time off in between. But it was always getting the injury and literally having no time to recuperate at all from them that made the lifestyle so tough for me.
I ask you also, a lot of people noticed that your voice is on TNN, which is going to be called Spike TV real soon. Doing, a lot of the promo pieces for the various shows. I mean, what exactly are you did the Robot show, Robot Wars for a while.
Right.
What are you doing besides, writing? What are your other, as far as TNN and other things that you've got?
Well, I'm not doing anything with TNN anymore.
Oh, really?
I think, and this is not, the guy who took over is Albie Hecht, and I met him, he's the new Spike TV guy, and he had a lot of success with SpongeBob and Global Guts on Nickelodeon, things like that. But once they made, there was a specific time when I went in, and I always had a lot of fun doing the voiceovers. And I noticed there was a change in that, whereas the dialogue used to be kind of clever, they were kind of like catering to like blatant sexuality. And I literally read copy that said something. It was about blind date, and it said just the way it said very little clothing, lots of sex, just the way we like it. And it was blind date, and it was a Valentine's Day special. And I kind of, after I did the thing, I said, oh, I get it. We're kind of doing this for people who don't actually have dates on Valentine's Day. And the guy kind of went, yeah. And that was the beginning of Spike TV, and as soon as it was over, I said to the producer, I said, well, I give it 2 weeks and I'll be out of here. And it was like a month later that, they called me up, Barry Bloom called me up and said, they decided not to use you anymore.
Oh,
and, but like I said, I like Albie Hecht. I think he's had a lot of, but I think the two things more than anything that, made their decision to go in the opposite direction, or this, men's channel direction, is that I think the ratings were down. I was at their upfront package the year before, and the statistics were bragging about, up 40% in this demographic, and they had all the statistics working for them. I think if you factor in, the decline of the Raw show,
that was a lot of it right there.
A lot of it, and I also think they spent something like $70 million on the rights to CSI, and I remember we promoed the heck out of that, and I asked them the next week, on the headphones, I said, so how'd CSI do? And the guy was like, oh, God. I said, what? It did like a 1.2, so it only at that point capped, about 30% of the Raw audience. And I think, this is just me speculating, I think they figured, hey, you know what, we're not going to get like the intelligent, drama viewer, so let's just, go with, this man concept. And honestly, I don't know why I didn't fit into the man concept, but I had fun doing it, and it was an easy job. I wish I still had that check coming in. But what I do now, I've written another book that will be out, hopefully, next summer. I wrote it up mostly January, February, parts of March, and it was just typed up, so I'm going to submit it to my editor, who I think will like it. And then I try to, do as many things, involving kids and speaking to groups and just hanging out. Sometimes I eased back into watching wrestling by going to kids' houses, who had, suffered quite a bit, either whether they were cancer survivors or muscular dystrophy patients. And that's how I started watching wrestling again. And so So I think it's been very, very good for me, and and I think good for the kids I hang out with. And so I just try to do as much of that as I can. And then I've got 4 kids, so between writing with kids and my own kids doing their activities, it actually keeps me very busy.
Now, is this book going to be having anything to do with baseball? Because I know you and I talked about you were thinking about doing a baseball book at one point.
Yeah. This is the baseball book.
Okay.
And you know what? As long as we're on books, do you mind if I get a cheap plug-in for Tatum Brown?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
This is, I really think that the fans who read, Have a Nice Day and Foley is Good will like it because it's got the same voice to it. And the first chapter is available to look at for free on Amazon.com or the publisher's website, which I believe is aaknopf, KNOPF.com or .org. And if they go on Amazon.com and they like it, and I really think they will like it, and I think they'll really like the father and son characters, then they can feel free to pre-order it, which would be quite a good thing for me actually. But with this book, I think it was after September 11th, and I wrote Tatum Brown a month 3 weeks after September 11th. So I think a lot of the themes in there about forgiveness and hope and innocence in a violent world, I think stem from the way I was feeling after 9/11, and really, if I had started the book when I wanted to, which was September, it was meant to be a book about revenge and manipulation, which would have been kind of consistent with some WWE storylines. And I think when I started writing it and really made the characters a lot more full-blooded characters with real emotions, I think that actually helped me out helped out the story. But I found myself really drawn to New York, even though I had grown up in Long Island. I always hated the city. I'd go into the Garden. That was like the big road trip, and get out of there as quickly as I could. And especially the Bronx. When I grew up, the Bronx was a place to get in and out of as quickly as you could. And I remember when I was 4 years old going to my first Yankee game and, seeing the squeegee guy come out. And my mom yelling at him, and I couldn't figure out why she was yelling at a guy who was, washing our windows for us. And when I started researching, just reading about New York and watching the Ken Burns documentary, I found, especially when it came to the Bronx, that people loved living there, in the 50s and the 60s. And also baseball was a thing that I actually got into in a strange way. I was a huge baseball fan when I was younger. And I actually started watching the Ken Burns documentary, the 18-hour thing, just as a way, like Bob Costas was mentioned in the PTC's, in their newsletters. Costas had a quote in there, about what he disliked current wrestling product. And I wanted to, look at baseball. I don't know why I felt like, if I watched a 20-hour documentary, I'd have some answers for Bob Costas, but apparently that's where it was at then. And I found it, and I really, I kind of fell back in love with the game, and my oldest son, Dewey, was, discovering baseball after all those years watching endless amounts of wrestling. And the two kind of converged, New York City and baseball, and I really wanted to tell a story, that incorporated those two things. So I spent probably 6 months. I call it research. My wife calls it sitting on the couch reading. But I was, constantly reading about either New York City or baseball. And my hope, and I think us on this, that when someone reads it, it will read like it's written by a guy who knows, what he's talking about those subjects. So, it takes place from the late 60s through the mid-70s, so it's kind of my try at historical fiction. And I think, once again, it's written in a similar voice to the wrestling autobiographies. And I think, even if people aren't baseball fans, I think they'll like it and we'll be able to associate with the characters.
Okay, we're going to come back with Mick Foley right after this. We'll start taking phone calls as well right after the break. You're listening to Wrestling Observer Live on the Sports Byline Radio Network. Okay, welcome back to Wrestling Observer Live. I'm Dave Meltzer, editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, with Brian Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly, and, of course, Mick Foley, whose book Tatum Brown will be coming out next month. And he's already finished another book, or pretty much done with a book on baseball that we were just talking about. Before we get to the calls, and a lot of people have been waiting for a long time, I just want to ask, about Hall of Fame and your thoughts on the following guys, most of whom you've been in the ring with, but all of whom you know very well. Okay. Shawn Michaels, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Undertaker, and Triple H.
Oh, man. You know what? I'm kind of an easy touch on these things. I think Shawn should definitely be in. And I've read, heard both sides. And
well, so have I.
I just think, at the awards show, if I was Shawn, I would have been mad, or at the very least, very disappointed that he wasn't nominated as one of the superstars of the decade, because there was a year and a half or 2 years where he was like the glue of the whole company. And I don't think it was his fault that things were in a down period when he was given that spot. And I think you compare that to what I did. I was like the focus of the show for like 2 months. I was a big part of the show, but I was never had to carry the promotion on my shoulders like he did. And I think he responded. I don't even think in terms of the business they did. I think he just had such great matches that he was, certainly I think in the top, 5 guys of his, of the past decade from a performance standpoint. And I think he should have been, on that Raw ballot in my place. I would vote him in. I would.
Didn't you say that his match with you at Mind Games was your favorite?
Yeah, I always tell people that, and it's almost like a disappointment to them.
Because they want you to say the Hell in the Cell, right?
Yeah, everyone wants to be, and it's funny. Like I said, I talk to groups of kids, and I'll read. I don't know if you ever heard about this series of books I proposed and actually wrote a couple and paid for myself to have illustrated, called the Rescal Lane. The street where all the little wrestlers live on, and that's worked great because you don't have to be a wrestling fan to enjoy them. And if I read them to people who don't know that they're about little wrestlers, they have no idea it's about wrestling. But if you are a wrestling fan, it works even better. And I'll go to schools and I'll incorporate the stories into talks about bullying and literacy. And then when I ask for questions, thinking that people are going to want to know about reading and writing, I'll start off by saying, all right, just to tell you up front, yes, it did hurt when the Undertaker threw me off the cell. And literally 3/4 of the hands will go down. It's kind of frustrating, that to have wrestled so many matches and have people remember that one.
Well, that's because those 2 spots have been replayed a million times in every video package and in movies. And
I said, I wrote about it in Have a Nice Day. I said, I think it's like the Willie Mays catch where it keeps getting better in people's minds, to where people swear it was 30 feet in the air. I tried telling them it was 16, and they're no, it was higher. But
I like how they always use that spot to get over the Undertaker too.
What's that?
I like how they always use that spot to get over Undertaker.
Or like whenever, or a Hell in a Cell. And but that's the curse. And of course, the Stakes pay-per-view is headlined by a Hell in a Cell. And the curse of that is that like when guys do a Hell in a Cell and they don't, and there isn't the big bump, people get disappointed, even when there's like a great match.
Yeah. And it's really Shawn Michaels' fault for having such a great match with the Undertaker.
Yeah, because you had to do something in that league.
Yeah, and I wrote about it. I don't know if I've ever told this story, but Terry Funk is one of the few decent impersonations I do, and he had some time to kill before going to a show, and we just happened to be in Stamford. And so we worked out on the Vince's weight equipment there, and then we had like a few more hours. So I asked, and I had this Hell in a Cell coming up, and I had no idea how I was going to pull it off. I really wasn't even that good a cage match wrestler, especially if there wasn't a lot of blood incorporated in it. And I was watching Shawn's match, and Terry, and I was literally like sitting there with my mouth open, going to Terry, how the hell am I going to try not top it, but even approach it? And that was where Funky sat there and he thought about it. He said, I think you start the match on top of the cage. And then I laughed and said, yeah, and then after, he throws me off, I'll climb back up. And that's exactly what we ended up doing, And it's, you look at it, I always try to say that, people look at Vince, like he doesn't have any regard for the guys. And I've told the story about how he sat there with me or stood there the entire time I was being attended to after the match, and when it was over, he said, you have no idea how much I appreciate what you just did. but I never want to see anything like that again. And that's when he introduced the term governor to me, which is something you put on a car to stop it from going too fast. And I think that, if I hadn't done such a good job of selling that move to Vince beforehand and seeming so, confident in the fact that I could do it without being hurt, it never would have happened. But I think I did a real good salesman's pitch on him, that to the point on, I guess he can do it without getting hurt.
Here's another question everybody asks is, what was supposed to happen with the choke slam on the cage?
Richie Posner he's the special effects magic guy, and I remember talking to him, and what I was looking for. And originally, and before Vince okayed the first bump, the big dramatic thing was going to be the choke slam, and Richie was going to fix the cage in such a way that little by little it would start to give. And I remember saying to Taker before I went out there, hey, it might take 5 or 6 before this thing, up to where we can kind of shove my body through it. And the effect I was looking for would be hanging upside down and the Undertaker trying to squeeze me through this hole. And that's not what happened, I went through that thing like a hot knife through butter, and Richie Posner, I'd say without exaggeration, apologized to me about 100 times after that. Hopefully I never made him feel too bad about it, but that was the effect we were looking for, and didn't happen at all.
Real quick, let's get to Benoit, Guerrero, Undertaker, and Triple H.
Yeah, okay, man. I'd hate to say anything against these guys, and I think in terms of Triple H and Undertaker, they'd have even stronger cases if their careers had ended like a year ago. I don't think Triple H has been quite up to his old standards. The leg injury, he probably came in a little too heavy, and just a couple of these programs haven't clicked. With Kane and with Van Damme and Booker, and I would think he would need another year, of good programming before you give him the okay. Undertaker, I'd say just because he's been such a strong character for so long, that even though I was a fan of the old gimmick, I would say he'd get in. Benoit, there's the argument that he hasn't been a main event guy, but I don't it's hard when you're doing something like pro wrestling. There's so many other intangibles, but just on ability, I think he should get in. And Eddie, I think is a couple of years away from really being able to cast a vote on. I think he's an incredible wrestler, and has wrestled several different styles, and certainly drew more money in Mexico than I ever did in any overseas market, and was a big deal in Japan. But I think I'd wait a couple of years until I cast my vote for him.
That's scary because that's almost exactly my opinion of every one of those guys we just went through.
One thing I'd like to say about Benoit is I think guys don't. I probably know him a little bit. I don't know if he does interviews on shows like this or not, but he's a nice guy, very nice guy. And on TV, I wish that fans could see a side of that. It's like instead of coming across like a nice guy, he's coming across almost like a generic bad guy, like the Rabid Wolverine. And maybe I'm naive about this, but I really think that the fans need someone, people they can get behind. And actually which is why I think they dropped the ball on Al Snow when he's coming off tough.
Oh, coming off tough enough. He had because they believed he was a real person. They thought they knew him.
Yeah, they thought they knew him, and they could see that he was a legitimately tough guy too, which I think had been a question before in the way his characters were portrayed.
A tough guy and a good guy.
Yeah, tough guy, a good wrestler, and a down, deep down good guy. I think they missed the boat on that, but I wish Benoit could bring out a little bit more of his natural natural personality instead of that grimacing generic one-dimensional tough guy.
Okay, we got to head to a break right now. We have almost no time for calls, but we'll try to get one call in when we come back because we're running low on time. I knew this was going to be too short of a time, but anyway, we will be back right after this. You're listening to Wrestling Observer Live on the Sports Byline Radio Network. Okay, welcome to the final segment here on Wrestling Observer Live. I'm Dave Meltzer, editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter with Brian Alvarez of Figure 4 Weekly. We're here from 8 to 10 p.m. every Sunday night on the Sports Byline Radio Network. Of course, our guest tonight is Mick Foley's book, Cheatham Brown, his first fiction book, novel on just on basically amalgamation of characters that he met and that he's been around as far as with pro wrestling, but it's not a pro wrestling book. It's a book about a kid growing up in a tough environment. Will be out next month, and you can go to www.amazon.com and actually read the first chapter before the book is released, which I'm actually going to do in the next day or two. We're going to go to Mitch in Berkeley. Mitch, what's going on?
Hey, it's good to be on with you guys. And, Mick, I just have one quick question, and that is, in an amazing career, any regrets?
Any regrets? Yeah, you know, I think I regret, you know, doing so much at some of the house shows with you know, very few people, you know, in the late 80s. And, you know, I do regret that, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, I do regret that, you know, channels between me and Vince got crossed and that we didn't pull off that WrestleMania match. And I think, you know, as commissioner, you know, and I think this is a problem Austin might have, is that in order to be an effective commissioner, you've got to be able to have that match once or twice a year. And, you know, after the Mania thing didn't work out, I just decided, you know, that I wasn't going to have matches. And I think, you know, that limited my time commissioner. But I do regret that I didn't pull that match off with Vince, because it would have been, you know, the culmination of a really good story.
And what's the best meal you've ever had with Abdullah?
Actually, you know what? Abdullah's got that great restaurant. I remember him, you know, treating me there at Abdullah the Butcher's house of ribs and Chinese food. And I think I went with the Chinese that day, and it was excellent.
And he refers to tongs as a gimmick, doesn't he?
I don't know. I'm glad you brought up his name. I need to get back in touch with him.
Yeah. Mick, we're totally out of time. I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. This was a lot of fun. And I wish you the best of luck with this book, because that will, you know, everything that you've done. And I gotta say this, you know, you opened up, as far as the publishing world, something to so many wrestlers. I mean, from, you know, Freddie Blassie and Billy Graham and so many of these people who, you know, never would have had a prayer of writing a book. And, you know, some of these books have been very good that have come out, you know, and a lot of it's because of the success of your book being a serious book about wrestling, telling the truth about wrestling, and I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it's nice when the guys...
Okay, we're totally out of time.